All right, Nick, if you recall in our last episode, we were reading fan comments on our IG and TikTok. And if you remember correctly, somebody called us a shill for Big Pharma. And of course, they spelled it Pharma, right? Because that's the way you spell it. So I thought for our next episode, we need to have somebody who's been called a shill for Big Pharma. He's been made fun of on social media. He knows what it's like to be in those social media trenches. So I turned to no other than the host of the Mehdi Hasan show. You can catch it on Sunday nights on MSNBC, stream it Tuesdays on Peacock, and the author, the New York Times bestselling author of the book that you see over his right shoulder, Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. And that's Mehdi Hasan. Mehdi, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
Thank you so much for having me. We three shills of Big Pharma together again.
Mehdi, it's so funny, the comments that we get. We're going to get into Twitter in a second, and it's a real place it's being in society. But at the top, I wanted to ask you, because I think like a lot of our audience members, and I can only speak for myself, I discovered you through that Al Jazeera interview years ago with Stephen Rogers, the Trump surrogate at the time that was working on his campaign. And it was such a good refresher of what, for lack of a better term, confrontational journalism should look like, where it's not really supposed to be confrontational, because if we're not agreeing upon the same set of facts in this sentence, then this conversation shouldn't continue. And he couldn't refute some of the things in that debate. So my question is, what is your secret, Mehdi? What is your superpower that it's a quality that's lacking out there in television right now, and you and only maybe a handful of anchors seem to have it?
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for your kind words. I would say it's not really a superpower, because superpower implies it's something only you or a certain number of people have or can have, and other people can't have it. So, for example, I can't be Superman because I simply cannot fly, and I cannot, use X-ray vision, and I'm not bulletproof. But the whole reason I wrote the book Over My Shoulder, Win Every Argument, is I do believe that the skill set I have is a skill set that others can acquire. There's nothing stopping journalists, interviewers, political candidates, anyone in this country from having those kind of exchanges, for doing those kind of blunt debates, for asking the uncomfortable questions. There's nothing that stops. There's no force field or supernatural barrier that stops anyone from doing that. And it annoys me when people, even in the best of intentions, will say to me, "Well, you do it because you're from the UK, or you do it because you were born this way." But no, we can all do it. And especially to my colleagues in the media, there is no reason why more journalists in this country should not be holding power to account, should not be having more confrontational, adversarial, combative conversations. It's a choice not to do that.
Mehdi, to that point about, when we think about people in power in the media, recently we've heard audio released as it relates to the former president talking about classified documents and then walking it back. And I know recently on Twitter, earlier today, actually, you were speaking to catching a tone from what he's saying, which seems a different tone than what he's expressed before. And when you consider that in light of the fact that there's members of Congress who still defend him in light of everything that's coming to light, that's now recorded, apparently, what do you make of that in terms of, both the coverage of that, to your point about who's speaking truth to all this, but then also when you're analyzing the former president's words and his stance right now, what are you making of potentially walking things back, potentially being in a place where he's really recognizing the trouble he's walking into?
Oh, he's certainly recognizing the trouble he's walking into. He's coming up with all sorts of nonsense excuses. I think he used the word bravado. It was bravado, which is a new locker room talk, which is the excuse he used when the Access Hollywood tape came out. This is unlike Trump. Trump never backs down, never apologizes, proud counterpuncher, lies, with every breath. And yet here he is trying to come up with novel excuses. What's so interesting about the Trump phenomenon right now is, of course, you can almost date it to the CNN town hall, where he goes on CNN. A lot of us said that was a mistake. CNN should not have put him on live prime time with a supportive audience. I think everyone agrees it backfired on CNN to the point where the CNN CEO is no longer the CNN COO. But what's interesting is that since that CNN town, perhaps because of the backlash, the interviews he's had have been much tougher. Even on Fox. I mean, the toughest interview we've seen with Donald Trump in recent days was Brett Baier on Fox. Brett Baier, who pretends to be a straight news host, but thanks to the Dominion case, we now know that in private he was saying, we should put Arizona back in the Trump column. It was never in the Trump column in 2020. But even Baier was, pushing him hard on some of his decisions as well as the documents issue. What's interesting with Trump in interviews now is, and he did an interview with Fox Digital this week that got him into trouble because he said, oh yeah, I had documents. And then later on he had to do another interview with ABC and Semaphore to say, I meant building plans. Sorry, he said, I have plans, which are the Iran military attack plans, reportedly. He said, no, they were building plans. I was building a golf course. So as many lawyers on Twitter have pointed out, shut up. Like, you tell your client, stop speaking. You have the right to remain silent for a reason. Problem is Trump is, constitutionally incapable of remaining silent. He shouldn't be doing all these interviews. So I do think there's two types of Trump interviews right now, which are fascinating. One is just let him speak. You don't need to be tough. There doesn't need to be any confrontation. He's just screwing himself over and digging his own hole by running his mouth. That's one thing. And then there's the actual, going back to the CNN town hall, put the documents case and his legal problems to one side. You still have Trump the racist, Trump the misogynist, Trump the fascist, all the kind of justifiable accusations about his extreme, abnormal, offensive behavior. That stuff still needs to be grilled. That stuff he still needs to be held accountable. That stuff he's gotten away with for far too long. So when I look at Trump interviews, I see interviews not pushing him. So for example, in that CNN town hall, Caitlin Collins, did ask some tough questions, but really got steamrolled by Trump. One classic example that really frustrated me was, the guy has said we should suspend the Constitution. He's on record saying we should stop the Constitution so I can be president again. That, in my view, makes you, that disqualifies you from the presidency. Every interview with Donald Trump should begin with, how can you be president when you want to suspend the Constitution?
No, it's a great point. And it funnels into the segue that I have, because as we're recording this tonight, Mehdi, or today, excuse me, News Nation is set to have a town hall with RFK Jr. And he's polling in the 15 to 20% range. And a while back, we had Eamon on the program to promote American Radical. And his podcast is really about how somebody can get down the rabbit holes of misinformation, right?
Oh, yeah.
And for you, specifically as a journalist, as somebody that's hosting a show, what responsibility do we have as journalists, network television, to platform RFK Jr. with all of the lies and misinformation that he has spread, specifically in the medical field, which he is not a subject matter expert in? Like, what do you make of mainstreaming some of this stuff as opposed to leaving it in the ulterior where people have to actually go search it out as opposed to mainstreaming it?
So first off, he was at 15 to 20%. Polls this week show him at below 10. He has cratered in the polling. Surprise, as more and more people see what he actually believes and says and does, and which shows he chooses to go on. Shockingly, it turns out that when your entire campaign is geared towards the MAGA movement, it doesn't help you in a Democratic presidential primary. Who'd have thought? What's interesting about the platforming issue, and I've been vocally saying not to platform him, that Dr. Peter Hotez, the vaccine scientist who Joe Rogan and RFK Jr. and Elon Musk challenged to a debate with RFK Jr. I've been one saying, don't debate him, don't platform him. And people have tried to mock me. People on the right think it's but you wrote a book called Win Every Argument. How can you be saying not to do? Well, actually, if you read the book, you'll make clear that I don't say you should have every argument. I think you should avoid bad faith discussions. And I talk about in the book, there's a chapter called Beware the Gish Galloper. And I talk about Trump being a Gish Galloper, someone who just steamroll you with misinformation and throws so many lies and so many cherry-picked facts and studies at you that you don't have time to rebut them all. And that's how they win. And I use Trump as the example, but RFK Jr. is a classic of the genre too. You watch that Joe Rogan interview he did. It's not just the anti-vax nonsense. It's nonsense across the board, whether it's on the link between HIV and AIDS, whether it's on how much money we've given to Ukraine. I mean, you go down the list, he lies about a lot and he does it at scale. And I think, you're right. He's not a medical expert. So why are we even talking about vaccines with him? And even mainstream centrist, quote unquote, centrist folks like Ross Douthat in the New York Times wrote a piece saying, well, come on, people, you can't just wish him away. Anti-vax sentiment is a real problem. You've got to talk about. Nobody's saying not to talk about anti-vax sentiment. Nobody's saying we shouldn't be trying to persuade anti-vaxxers, at least those who are persuadable, which seems to be a smaller number than many think. But this is not how you do it. The idea that you put RFK Jr. on a town hall with a live audience to talk about vaccines with a host who's not qualified to push back, and as we saw in the Caitlin Collins example, doesn't have the time or space to do it, is just reckless. It's irresponsible. This is not a joke. We're not debating tax rates here. We're debating people's lives. I mean, I would give the example of Samoa, where RFK Jr. helped push a anti-measles vaccine misinformation campaign. And in Samoa, 50, 60 kids died. right? This is no joke. People's lives are at stake, children's lives. So no, this is not some kind of abstract kind of point-scoring Twitter spat or kind of debating union, performance. And a lot of what passes for journalism these days, sadly, in too many parts of our media machine, is just performance, spectacle. The people who want to see RFK Jr. debate Hotez, they don't give a damn about science. They don't care about persuasion. This is simply spectacle. It's ratings. It's clicks. That is our world now. The idea that, even if I were to think it was, a valuable goal to try and debate RFK Jr., which I don't, the idea that you would do it on Joe Rogan's podcast is absurd. In what world would Joe Rogan be a neutral or a qualified or an informed moderator? So no, I don't think the way you work out your public health strategy or work out the efficacy of vaccines is to have a live debate with someone who is a demonstrable liar on such issues and has no qualifications to speak on vaccines. As I say, would we ask a World War II historian to debate a Holocaust now? No.
To that point, and I agree with you, Joe Rogan, great on news radio, not so much as a informed critic of science. Mehdi, when you talked about media a moment ago, and I have something that sort of sits with me these days is we're seeing a changing landscape in American coverage as it relates to town halls and these spectacles that may not be necessarily journalistically sound. In your experience, because you've obviously worked outside the U.S. as well as a journalist, is the U.S. sort of standing on its own with performative journalism or performative spectacle at the sacrifice of journalism? Or is this potentially more of what we're seeing potentially as a global effort for journalism to be taking a step back to spectacle?
I think it's a global effort, but I think we're leading the way, sadly. I mean, it's interesting because I wear many hats, right? I'm an American. I'm also a Brit. I'm a dual citizen. I worked in the UK. I also worked for Al Jazeera. So I'm very familiar with the Middle East and Asia. And my family are from India. I'm of Indian descent. And the Indian media, Indian news channels make Fox look like NPR, right? So you look at some of the shout fests you have on right-wing Indian TV. The Modi supporters make the Trump supporters look like, sandal-wearing liberals. So it is happening around the world. But I do think we've led the way in the Western world, at least. The line in the UK used to be when, America sneezes and Britain catches a cold. And there is this infectiousness to our politics and our media. And I think you see that in the UK, for example. There's a channel called GB News in the UK, which was launched a few years ago after I left the UK. I left in 2015. And it's a wannabe Fox. It's a wannabe Newsbags. It pushes, British TV is heavily regulated compared to our own. So within the limits of British regulation, it pushes kind of right-wing, pseudo-populist, anti-establishment, anti-intellectual nonsense. And you can see that is very much taken from the United States. They've tried to push anti-vax stuff, not with the same success as the US. They've definitely pushed the kind of anti-elite drain the swamp nonsense from the MAGA movement. And yet that is spreading around the world, that performative BS. Social media, of course, has pushed it around the world. It's made the world much smaller. When you see a lot of the right-wing Twitter personalities in the UK and the US crossing over. I think recently there was an event in the UK where US and UK kind of right-wing anti-establishment influencers, if I can call them that politely, got together and did an event. So there is a lot of overlap. I think we've led the way, and I think it's really, really damaging to our democracy. And it's also, it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, because the people who are undermining politics and the media are also the ones saying, well, we're doing well because nobody believes. I love the people on Twitter, especially, who say to me, well, you work for MSNBC and you work for cable and nobody trusts the media. And it's like, yeah, that's partly because the media have made a lot of mistakes. It's partly because we have an active movement trying to destroy legitimacy of our institutions. When people say, oh, Republicans don't trust the media, again, why? Because Donald Trump has told them not to trust the media from day one. If you have leaders who you trust telling you day in, day out, there was a poll a couple of years back that showed Republicans trust Donald Trump for information more than they trust the media, more than they trust their own family members.
This episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast is presented by the good folks over at Razoo. Razoo is a brand new networking and collaborating service for artists in the music industry, providing music creators the collaborative tools to create and enhance songs virtually. Find out more about Razoo at razoo.io today. Well, Mehdi, it feeds in perfectly. These follow-ups, you're hitting them out of the park, Mehdi, because it's time to debate me, bro, as everybody would say to you on Twitter, because Mehdi, for background and context, as my co-host is shaking his head, I've worked in technology for 15 plus years. I've launched some of the streaming services that you watch, from HBO Max to Discovery Plus to the PJ
Not
Tour.
called HBO Max anymore.
Yeah, well, exactly. I know now it's now Max, but so I've launched some of these streaming services, and I've also launched platforms that are similar to Twitter. Twitter is a privately run company. It's not a constitutional right to own Twitter. If at best, in my opinion, it's an amplification service. You can still go find the information in other places. You don't have a constitutional right to this app. Use it or don't use it. It's not your house. You are a renter in this house. Now, am I oversimplifying that, Mehdi? Because you have such a large presence on Twitter, and you just mentioned a moment ago about the dangers that Twitter has started to fall down, specifically as Elon took over ownership. So, what do you make of social media overall? And what do you make of, am I oversimplifying it, of, hey, it's just an app, you can delete it? This is not a real space. You don't have a right to this.
So I think you're both right and wrong. I think it is an app. You don't have a constitutional right to be on there or say whatever you like on there. Those of us who criticize the right when they said we must be allowed to publish whatever we want, and said, well, Twitter's a private company. I don't think you can then turn around and then say Twitter, Elon must do this or that. It's his thing. He bought the damn thing. It's his toy. So fair enough. At the same time, we have to live in the real world. In the real world, Twitter has massive, massive influence on our political processes, on our elections, on our democracy, on our news media. And we as a country have decided that those things have public value. And therefore, the government has a role in investigating or regulating or just checking things are going fine. And, some of us think the Democrats made a huge mistake in not investigating the original Twitter purchase, in not trying to slow it down, in not trying to really do proper due diligence. And people like Chris Murphy in the Senate and others said, well, now we should investigate what role Saudi Arabia has in its ownership of Twitter. That all was too late. That should have been done way before. The idea that one of the world's most influential communications platforms can just be bought by a guy and we don't know who's behind it. We don't know what the promises were made. We talk about Hunter Biden and his foreign connections. Hunter Biden needs to get in line behind Elon Musk. We have no idea what Elon Musk says to Chinese government officials. He was just in China recently in private. We know how much his businesses depend on the Chinese government. Largesse. He never criticizes China, you'll notice. And I think, look, those are all legitimate questions to be had about ownership of the platform. And look, I'm on there because you say, I have a big presence. I have 1.3 million followers. That's not a humble brag. That's just a statement of fact. That is the place where I can get my biggest audience off of my TV show. And it's also the place where I've had, as depressing as it can be, it's also a place where I have a lot of fun. Let me be honest with you. It's fun. Twitter at its best is funny, is entertaining, is enjoyable. It also makes you want to kind of, kill yourself sometimes because it is so now filled with trolls. It has become almost unusable. I say almost unusable because I'm still using it, so it's not fully unusable. But am I looking for an alternative? I think most of us are. Most people I know would love to do I'm on Blue Sky, but it hasn't really scaled up. It's still invite only, the new Jack Dorsey app. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are planning apparently a rival app. Let's see how good or bad that is. If you could replicate Twitter, people would try and people would leave because it is horrible right now. Like anything I tweet, the first comment is some blue check MAGA dude, is some anti-vax crazy. Yesterday, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I tweeted, RFK was doing a Zoom panel with the woman who turned up at a state legislative committee hearing during the pandemic and said, taking the vaccine made you magnetic. And she tried to put a fork to her forehead and said, it will stick to you. Like, that's who RFK Jr. was on a panel with. And I said, he's not a serious person, he's not a serious person, he's not a serious person, he's not a serious person. I tweeted that, quote tweeted that. Instantly, the first 20, 30, whatever replies, you're not a serious person. You're trying to shut down debate. You're fake news. And it's like, there's always been trolls, but now the fact that you can pay $8 and be the first to reply with your nonsense and conspiracy theory and predictable crap just makes the site unusable, unworkable. And this is the problem with the whole, limited definitions of free speech. The idea that you can swarm and dominate others through payment is absurd and doesn't lead to more free discussion or free argument. And that's why free speech does require rules for it to be free, because otherwise you just have kind of mobs, and in this case, paid mobs. Isn't it funny? They complained so much about blue checks, and then they came up with the worst blue check system. And by the way, I still have a blue check. So where was the blow against elitism? I don't want it, but I still have it. Oh, well.
Actually, I do have to ask you a follow-up. Do you now have to pay the $8, or did you just get grandfathered in?
No! How dare you? Those are fighting words.
I
I
gotta
will
ask.
never pay the $8. How dare you? In fact, what's so funny is the night Musk did that change where he gave back the blue check to LeBron and a few others, right? And then it became anyone with over 1 million followers. And I remember somebody messaged me and said, "You have a blue check. Did you pay?" And I was like, "No." I was so angry because I was enjoying not having a blue check for a few days. And I tweeted it going, I then found a hack. I think Chrissy Teigen came up with a hack how you can get rid of your blue check. So I went in, I changed whatever it changed, I got rid of my blue check, and then I stupidly tweeted, "Elon Musk tried to give my blue check, I don't want it." And then everyone's like, "We don't have a blue check, so maybe you're just lying." I'm like, "Oh my God." And then he gave the blue check back the next one. I was like, "I give up. Like, I can't get rid of this blue check, whatever." Now everyone knows that, there are legacy checks still, that Elon Musk basically lies like Trump. Everything he says is not true. He said he was going to strike a blow again in favor of the peasants against the elites, and he didn't do it. He came up with a worse system whereby you pay for $8 and yet the elites get to keep the blue check without it. But there's so many similarities between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. We could go for hours on a Musk-Trump parallel, but like the grift and the complete conning of the base is one of the most clear analogies between these two men.
So, when we think about that, actually, I mean, let's just step away from it because obviously Twitter is one conversation, right? But yeah, Mehdi, as you're out and about, say on an airplane, mass transit, whatever, what is it that you prefer to talk about with folks? I mean, is it still being in the political space, or if some random person recognizes you and they just want to engage in conversation, what would you rather discuss with them?
I'd rather not discuss anything, to be honest. I'm very antisocial. My wife has a gag that whenever I'm in public, it's whenever I'm eating ice cream that somebody stops to talk to me. I'm always stuffing my mouth with gelato or a cone, and someone will say, "Oh," and I'll be like, chocolate all over my mouth like a child. So it's very embarrassing. So my wife and kids don't like being out in public with me when people recognize me because I'm always embarrassing myself. No, I in general, even before I was a public figure, I'm one of these people who kind of gets on a plane and puts on headphones and doesn't talk to the person next to me. I have a very low Uber score because I get in an Uber and I just put headphones on. I don't want to talk to the driver, and people think that's not elitism. I just don't want to talk to people when I'm out and about. I like to read Twitter and watch TV. So no, having said all that, as a public figure, I am deeply appreciative of people who come up to me and say good stuff about my work and want to take a selfie or whatever it is. It's weird. I haven't had much, maybe I'm jinxing it now by saying this. I haven't had much hate or abuse from people. Nobody comes up to me and says, "You're the fake news." Tells you, it's a reminder of what social media does to us, right? On social media, all I get is kind of people's abuse. No-name egg accounts being like, "You're fake news." Funny, nobody says it in public. It's funny what social media enables and emboldens our worst impulses and emboldens the bullies online. But in real life, I've had conservatives come up to me and say, "Hey, I don't agree with what you say, but I enjoy how you say it," or stuff like that. But I've not had, touch wood, any kind of abuse in public. It's always very, very nice people coming to me to chat to me. And but no, nobody's come up to me and say, "Hey, debate me, bro." That hasn't happened yet.
Producer Tim, I think you know what to cut there. Mehdi, before we let you go, I want to get into a few rapid fire questions. Some of these come from myself, my co-host, and some of the listeners out there. So if you're ready, let's begin. Favorite movie Mehdi Hasan will drop what he's doing to watch if he sees it on TV?
Die Hard.
Die Hard. Okay. Person you get mistaken for the most? If you do get mistaken.
I mean, there's a running gag at MSNBC between me, Ali Velshi, and Ayman Mohyuddin that we're the three Muslim brown dudes on ours. But I mean, I don't think anyone would confuse me with Ali. I have more hair. I love Ali. He's my hero. I think who I get confused with is the person I used to get confused with. What's the name of that magician who used to do crazy stuff inside like glass boxes?
Oh, David Blaine?
David Blaine. People used to say, "Oh, you look like David Blaine." That's who I used to get.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting one. I was not expecting that. All right. Speaking of Ayman, who's a good friend of the pod here on social media, he's famous for his Ayman meets and hashtags and all these exquisite.
You look like Ali Velshi.
I look like Ali. I look like more like Mike Tirico. A lot of people would say, another NBC guy. Well, real quick, what is on Mehdi's must-eat meal as opposed to what Ayman's eating over there with all his Ayman meets hashtags? What's on Mehdi Hasan's must-eat meal?
I'm gonna go cheeseburger. I love a cheeseburger more than anything else. In terms of comfort food, I mean, I'm of Indian descent, so I love Indian food the most. But in terms of just one meal, always that will any time of day, morning, night, any day of the week. Do you want a cheeseburger? I'll take a cheeseburger.
Oh, I love it. What is something you wish you were smarter about that you play off really well in terms of knowing about?
I don't get the question. Something I don't know about but pretend to be know about?
Yes, exactly. Right.
Oh,
If there's something in that realm.
I can't reveal that secret. I'm smart about everything. No.
That's his superpower. He's selective with that response.
I'll tell you this, technology. I'm a complete Luddite, even though I spend my life on Twitter. And most of the time I have to get my daughter to kind of fix my Instagram.
Oh, well, see, there you go. My kids are too young to fix it. And also I've been in technology, so I should know it. All right. Last question. An interview you wish you could do with someone, either dead or alive, no holds bar, no strings attached, no agreed upon elements prior. And why would you interview that person?
I would say, for me, it's always been Tony Blair is one person that got away from me. I would love to interview Tony Blair because I have a very weird kind of personal relationship with Tony Blair. As a young person, as an 18-year-old, I was a massive Blair fan when he came to office in England as Prime Minister. He was this big phenomenon. And then my own political journey in life kind of tracked what happened with him in office, the Iraq War, my disillusionment with politics, his lies, his alliance with Bush, his think about Blair, why I'm not saying Trump or all these people. Like, I don't like interviews where it's just shooting fish in a barrel. Like, it's something, you mentioned Steve Rogers. As fun as that was, it's too easy, right? I actually love the interviews where my opponent is super skilled, is super eloquent, is hard to pin down. I enjoy the challenge. And as much as I loathe Tony Blair's politics and what he's done, he's a formidable public speaker, a formidable debater. No real interviewer has ever. Jon Stewart actually came close to landing a blow on him, but no formal interviewers have never really pinned him down on what he did, especially in relation to Iraq. And I would love the chance to go one-on-one in depth with Blair.
One of the best people out there to listen to. Watch his program Sundays on MSNBC at 8 p.m., Tuesdays stream it on Peacock. Go get the book Over His Right Shoulder for those of you watching on YouTube. Win Every Argument. The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. Mehdi, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program. Continue success.